Blocks would be detention?
No.
No,
Retention?
it's a lock, so it's not quite the same situation.
Because you're not waiting for it to see.
Are you talking about storm?
Okay. Good evening.
I learned that from all my engineering firms I've worked for.
Good evening. Welcome to the November 19th meeting of the Everett Planning Commission. Ayana, would you please call the roll?
Chair Chatters,
Here.
Commissioner Adkins,
Here.
Commissioner Yanisek,
Here.
Commissioner Ballard,
Here.
Commissioner Sullivan,
Here.
Commissioner Shelby.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Adkins, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
Yes. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Shtahopes people, and their successors, the Tulalip tribes. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered on, and taken care of these lands and waters. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices to form a more just and equitable society.
Thank you. We've all had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes. Are there any corrections? Okay, seeing none, are there any objections to approving them as they are? Okay, seeing none, the minutes from November 4th are approved. And we now have an opportunity for commissioner reports. Commissioners, any reports?
I'm going to say something. It's almost the end of the year, and I just want to let everybody know that my term on the Planning Commission is coming to a close. I'm not reapplying, and so this will be one of my last meetings. I'm not planning to come next month, but I just thought I'd, just in case something happens, just let everybody know that, and I guess thank everybody for the wonderful experience I've had the last 7 years I've been on the commission. And it's been great, and I really appreciate everything from planning staff, various iterations, started with Alan and David, and now Yorick, and I've just been very impressed by everybody at the department and the way the city's run, and really appreciate my experience, and it's been great, so thank you, everybody, and I guess we'll see you next month, but just in case, I wanted to say something.
You're not getting out of here without a proper goodbye. Nice try.
You know, actually, I think in 7 years, I don't know that I've ever had a report. So this is my one time, and it's all about me anyway. But whatever. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Yanisek. Any additional reports? Okay, we'll turn it over to staff.
Not much to report on today. That's a hot mic. Not much to report on today. Thank you in advance. We'll have a few more words at one of the 2 December meetings, but 7 years, that is a lot of Tuesday nights. That is a lot of attention paid to the city and a lot of good advice given to the planning staff that you mentioned. So thank you already. 2 items on today's agenda: urban form goals and policies and centers. These are both topics that we have touched on earlier this year, a couple of months ago. Our general strategy around this is to touch it. These are pretty core to the comprehensive plan, so worth spending some time on to get right. We touched in on this in, I think it was September, with the urban form goal alignment and the goals and policies. And then we moved kind of down the implementation line into the regulations, the zoning maps, and the use matrices in the last couple of meetings. So that gives us a little bit of an idea of the details and how policies could be implemented. Staff and hopefully you've learned from that process and now can look at the urban form goals and policies in a little bit of a new light. We made some edits and I think improvements since the last version. And just keep in mind that this is describing the regulations that we talked about 2 weeks ago, basically. And does this do the right job of setting the stage for those? A little bit of an iterative process there. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. We now have an opportunity for public comment. To those of you joining us remotely, please mute your microphone, or if you're calling in, mute your phone by pressing *6. At each opportunity for public comment, I'll ask if anyone wants to speak. If you're participating remotely and would like to provide comment, unmute your microphone or press *6 on your phone. Please provide your name for the record, and when you're done, please mute again. If you're in attendance and would like to comment, please fill out a speaker sign-in sheet located on the table by the door. Ayana, do we have anyone remotely who would like to provide public comment?
No remote comments.
Okay, I know we do have someone in person. We have Laura Gurley, Port of Everett Planning Director. Ms. Gurley, when you're ready, we would love to hear from you.
Okay. Laura Gurley, Director of Planning, and I don't think I've met all of you, so it's nice to see some new faces. I think you were kind of touched on a little bit of what we're here to talk about tonight. I'm going to read a brief statement and then can definitely answer some questions. Let's see. The Port has requested that the city include policy and goal language in the urban form and design and development chapter updates that would encourage smart development of compatible uses adjacent to each other while avoiding potential social justice and quality of life impacts from incompatible uses being next to each other. This policy language would set the stage for zoning changes to achieve these goals. This request is specific to the area adjacent to the entrance of the International Seaport, west of West Marine View Drive, north of Hewitt, east of the BNSF main line. There's kind of a little triangle in there. And a small area to the south between the railroad track and Bond Street, and the BNSF main line. This request does not affect Rucker Hill, that neighborhood up there. We are asking for policies to be included in the comp plan update that would allow the city to implement zoning to serve as a transition zone between the seaport and residential uses. The area in question has never been used to date for anything other than commercial and light industrial. Prior to 2018, nearly all of it was zoned M2 heavy manufacturing, which was at the time the same zoning as the seaport. Since 2018, the zoning in the area has been changed a few times through rethink zoning and a couple of other changes that occurred. The previous M2 zoning, which most of this area was, limited residential use to caretaker and watchman's quarters and possibly secure community transition facilities, which I learned are like sexual predator kind of, I don't know if it's a halfway house or a jail or what, but I had to look that up. Immediately adjacent to the seaport. This arrangement allowed 1 to 2 blocks of private industrial land to act as a transition area between seaport activity, which can be loud and operate at all hours, and areas east of West Marine View Drive, where people might live. Current zoning, which is LI1, Light Industrial 1, allows for many types of residential, including multifamily, to be built immediately adjacent to the BNSF main line and the seaport subsequently. We know that having residential next to M2 zoning can be challenging. Smart planning today can avoid conflicts in the future. As for the loss of potential residential units, because I know you're planning to try to squeeze as many people in the city as you can to meet the goals, there will be some trade-offs with light industrial displacement as part of the future light rail and the new Aquasox Stadium, that maybe those could be accommodated in this new transition area that we're talking about. And residential will be located closer to those areas, the future light rail and Aquasox Stadium. RCW Title 47, the Public Highways and Transportation title, acknowledges that facilities of statewide significance, which the seaport is designated as, should be preserved and protected. RCW Title 36.70A.085, which addresses comprehensive plans and the port element, the marine port element, further encourages protections of international container ports and related industrial land through resolution of, and this is direct quotes from the RCW, resolution of land use conflicts along the edge of the port core area, and minimize and mitigate to the extent practicable incompatible uses along the edge of the port core area. It also allows that use of buffers and transition zones between incompatible uses and use of limitations on non-industrial uses in the port core area and surrounding areas could be used as tools to reduce conflicts. Thoughtful land use planning is a primary way to do that. The seaport supports more than 40,000 jobs in the region, along with Everett's two largest employers, Boeing and Naval Station Everett. And if there is an opportunity to put a light industrial buffer in between the heavy industrial and residential, that is the socially responsible thing to do. And with that, we very much appreciate the city's consideration of promoting thoughtful zoning to alleviate potential future conflicts. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Give a little context on this too. We talked about this just briefly. I can't remember if it was 2 weeks ago or a month ago. There have been so many meetings here. We have in our first draft, the complete draft of the zoning map, there is an area west of Marine View Drive, north of the tracks, that is currently Light Industrial 1, LI1, and is that we put to LI, Light Industrial. For the most part, all of the other LI1s were switched to, we just renamed it LIMU, L-I-M-U, Light Industrial Mixed Use. That change was related to the request that Laura just mentioned. All of this, I want to stress, is a placeholder. We're just beginning this conversation and haven't had a chance to, I'm glad that we're able to start it right here with the Planning Commission. Many more conversations need to be had, including with the property owners and others with interests there. There are two parts to the request, some policy language that can go in the urban form element. Some of it may go in the design and development element if it deals with the specific design of specific buildings within the area and maybe noise attenuation and things like that. Some of the freight traffic and freight routes issues would go in the transportation element, which we expect to bring to the Planning Commission in January. And then we have a marine port element that also currently has some policies around compatibility, noise, and noise attenuation in new construction. We have urban form here, and I don't think we see a lot about compatibility with the marine port area here, so that's something that Laura is advocating for some addition, and we can talk about that. But just want to also point out those other vehicles for having some policy language around it. And then for the comprehensive plan map, the request would be something equivalent to the LI zone that would prohibit residential on these parcels. As Laura laid out, these have changed over the years from not allowing residential to allowing residential. And I think the port wasn't thrilled with that change to allow residential. Was that the downtown plan or Metro Everett about 10 years ago, I think. So that's about it in terms of context. We have the zones that we have in that area right now as a placeholder, but still expect to have more conversations around it. Be happy to start those conversations now. Otherwise, I think the marine port element, when we get to that, would be an excellent time to host that conversation in full.
York, just on this map here that we've been provided here, are we looking at this little section? It actually looks like it's got an LI printed right over it, that little
It does, yes.
corner there. And so immediately surrounding that, it's a mixed use currently?
So north of the tracks is LI, south of the tracks, which is the Hewitt north side frontage, is MU 15, I think. So we did not change that one
Oh, that's the
along
trash
Hewitt.
right there.
That's the underground.
Oh, God, okay, got it.
And I thought I cleaned out a little zoom. Yeah, there we go. Here's a zoom of the zoning map. For anyone who's following along online, we're looking at the zoning map, which you can find linked to the Planning Commission packet from 2 weeks ago. So the part that we're talking about is this LI down to here, and then this tail.
Can I ask what is currently actually being done on that property these days?
There
we
are
know?
industrial type uses. There's some storage yard and some industrial businesses.
There's residence and childcare.
At-large brewing, there's a couple of
North of the
apartments
tracks?
above restaurants.
No, not north of the track. North of the track says childcare, the brewery and the storage yard.
So brewery, is that a restaurant too? I mean, or
I
is it
believe
just,
so.
so there's, sounds like a fairly mixed use right now. I guess if I could ask one other question, Ms. Gurley, you mentioned incompatible, and can you talk a little more about what the port's concern is specifically about incompatible? And I think I know what you mean, but
Sure.
I'd like to hear maybe a little more
Yeah.
elaboration about, I guess, what the specific concern is about,
Yeah,
the
we can
incompatible.
absolutely have that. So on the little map here, you see our shipyard is right here, which just got, they're aiming for a Washington State Ferries contract to build ferries. It's gonna be like a 3-year contract. They pretty much operate 24/7. They also are going after Navy contracts, which would be 24/7 of operation of sandblasting, grinding, all sorts of metal work. And if you're talking about immediately right on the other side of the tracks, having residential where people might want to be able to open their windows and not hear a bunch of noise. Lights will be on in the nighttime while they're working down there, and it's about basically not setting up a neighborhood to be unhappy because of port operations. We aren't going anywhere. There's nowhere we can go. But is it smart development to put residential right on top of a port? For some reason, we believe that it's not. Alternatives might be looked at where there could be requirements for things that would have to happen in their construction. But we know that there's likely to be even more pushback with a city trying to dictate how somebody builds their building, more so than just the standard building code. So we can still have active, things happening in the city there, but to have residential smack dab right there, front and center, being bothered by an operation that's there already.
So would the concern be that, say, for example, it did get zoned residential, put in a couple apartment complexes there, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, all the residents start complaining, and that somehow then, maybe a hearing examiner makes a decision contrary to the port or something, and
Anything.
the pressure just so that it just puts pressure on the port to curtail.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure the city gets calls too. I know we get calls because the city got calls about something going on there. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Whether it rises to the level of going back to a hearing examiner, I don't know, but you could end up with unhappy people in a situation where they thought they were getting a fabulous view, which they would have, but they might not be happy to open their windows and get, fresh air in because of the noise coming in. Things like that.
I live over in the riverfront townhomes, and I have to deal with 15 times a day that train coming by. But so I do feel like, for some people though, they would still be willing to make that exchange. That they can have a view of the water. It just means they can't open their window. I know for me, while it was really annoying to deal with the train, and it definitely was at the top of mind of, well, maybe we could go and find somewhere else that didn't have the train breaking on a constant basis, and just they're so long. They're 100 cars, and you're just sitting there for 10, 15 minutes just hearing the screeching. And anyways, I share that just because I do think that there are people that there's got to be some way to communicate to folks that if they were to be there, that there's going to be noise, and have that be part, I don't want to say selling point, but just again, I was looking for a affordable place to live, and I felt like that train definitely helped make that place more affordable than it might have otherwise been.
Sure. And if I can speak to that, we do have the port compatibility area that overlaps part of this area. And that does give people a heads up but it's more relative to single family buildings and buildings more than 10,000 square feet, which multifamily would definitely be notified of being in that overlay area. But we're honestly, people who have moved into houses that are near the port knew they were moving in next to a port, and we still get complaints and calls. And can you change the direction of the lights? Can you not be doing that in the middle of the night? And we have to operate when the ships come in. You know, we can't not do cargo operations. So I understand what you're saying, but we have an opportunity right now to try to smooth that out a little bit before we end up in a conflicting situation.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. I just also, I feel strongly that, our housing crisis is in such a place that if I was someone that I was just priced out of King County, that I'd be more than willing to take an affordable place that, where you just have to deal with noise over having to move out to like Arlington or Stanwood or even further out of the metro.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I understand it's a dilemma, because I definitely understand and appreciate that as a valid concern. It'd be nice. I guess the concern I have is in this current environment, a place in Metro Everett, the downtown core, the one place in the city we want to drive density. I think about look at the Park Place project and way out by the hospital and residents. This would be the kind of place we'd want to put something like that if we, ideally. So that's the dilemma. That's the other side of it, is that it would be the ideal place to drive that kind of density in people. And I guess it would seem absurd, frankly, to me, that someone would move in right next to the port and then complain about it. But I know that in reality that does happen too. So it's a dilemma.
Are there any other tools at our disposal that could help address this?
I'm sure, yes. I mean, construction techniques and things like that, but don't know if they would work. I mean, you can have triple pane windows, but then you never open your window.
I might be making this up, but I seem to remember something, sometimes like a coming to the nuisance doctrine that kind of addresses it. I might be making that up, but the idea that you don't get to, like I said, build your house next to the port and then complain, hey, there's a port next to my house, kind of thing.
And then there's
know.
human behavior.
Well, and that's again, I get it. Yeah, so I get it.
It's
wondering-
reverse sensitivities, and I mean, you get it for people that want to move out to bucolic areas and then think, oh my gosh, there's manure smells, and they complain about those, so.
Has the city evaluated the ports, the statutes that the port has cited as far as what our obligations would be to zone it in any particular manner?
No. This is an unfinished policy brief for the commission. I think we're starting with this kind of introductory conversation. It was came up in the last meeting or the meeting before that. I think we need to prepare that whole kind of context for it, where we've been, where we could go, what the policy and regulatory context would be. I'm thinking that two options is with the marine port element, and that would be in January, I think. And we could attach this kind of compatibility discussion to it and look at the zoning map there. Or we will certainly be talking zoning map again closer to the end when we bring it all together. So I think those are two opportunities to bring you a specific, I don't know if it's a whole agenda item on it, but a little bit more of a memo and some context for it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have increased some of the commercial uses that are permitted in the L1 zone, so that they could still be a bar or a restaurant or other gathering place that makes noise and is not, if you're out on the deck overlooking the port and you can still see people working or the view and everything else, but it's a noisy tap room. Is that still permitted in the L1? And I remember we have had some conversation around this, and I just don't know if it's sort of a hybrid between mixed use and L1 that might work. And I'm just thinking out loud at the moment.
Yeah, that's another part. I think the main concern is residential. And then outside of that, if it were to limit residential, there are different ways that we could do that too. So there are lots of options.
Is there a way that, whether it's from the port or the city or both, I guess to see the complaints about noise and then see whether it's coming from single family, like owners of single family residences or people living in, say the Grand Ave apartments? Just because I would be very interested in knowing that, just for the policy solution.
Sure. Anecdotally, I would say it's predominantly single family, but we can look at our logs and get that info for you for sure.
Because I would feel like much more okay with, I guess, I don't know if there's any single family homes in that lot right now, but I would definitely agree with like not having those there. I really don't want to close off the idea of like some kind of mixed use apartment building there.
There is one mixed-use building on the south side of, on the north side of Hewitt, south of the tracks, in that area.
Already contained in that little triangle.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioners, additional questions?
Can we get granular on something like this that says, if you're on facing West Marine View Drive, you can have residential, but on the back side of the lot, you can't? I mean, I'm just thinking, how far away does somebody need to be for it to stop being a problem?
Yes, to the first question.
Okay.
We can design, I'm sure, very specific regulations if they're supported by the need. To the second question, how far? I do not know.
Or if you happen to have,
I don't either.
I mean, if it comes up, write it down.
I mean, for that particular area, it would seem to me that if it was gonna be any residential, we would not want there to be like, houses. We want density, we would want height and, or at the very least, a mixed use type of thing. That's where we want, so a single family, I don't know if that's the right terminology anymore these days. I don't think would be the desirable for that neighborhood. None of that, downtown in Metro, ideally.
We have a minimum density and a minimum height. We'll look at what we do with those going forward for the MU zone that currently the MU zone, so that's where south of the tracks is currently MU, I believe, does prohibit, but you're right that that's not the ideal.
Is it possible to use some sort of overlay to even create something new that just applies to that maybe does get more nuanced and maybe.
I think if we can dream it, write it, reliably, understandably, and justify it, then we can do it.
Laura, I have a question, and just out of curiosity, do you know what is done on the east side of Alki that's directly across from the terminal where there are residences right there?
I do not know. I would have to look at the Seattle.
I just didn't know
Yeah.
whether your connections,
I can easily find out, that's for sure.
because that's sort of the same situation there. I mean, it's right directly across the street from the terminal, and those are pretty expensive houses, and they are single family, so, and
Yeah.
some multifamily.
I'll ask my Port of Seattle contacts, see what they do.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioners? Well, I think we're looking forward to hearing more on this and having further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna skip out because it's getting really, really windy out there, so have a good night, you guys.
Good night.
Travel safely.
Okay, we're now ready to move on to agenda item 4, and that is the urban form element.
Okay, urban form. I think I gave kind of the intro to this at the beginning of the meeting under staff comments, but we've brought the goal alignment sheet and some of the policies before a month or two ago. And this is our proposed. Staff have done a couple of rounds of review on this and looked through the policies in light of the other elements and how those have evolved since then, and our work on the zoning map and the land use map and the zoning tables. And we have a complete set of goals and policies. I don't think the goals have changed.
Income ranges, is that, didn't we?
That's
Commissioners,
in,
am I-
that's in housing, and it will be in
Okay.
design and development.
3, bringing up the port again, do we have a specific section for the port?
We don't. So yeah, UF 26 and 27 cover compatibility with the airport and with the naval station. That was kind of a glaring miss, not a miss, but that it's not in here when you look at those two. I think the marine port element is where such a policy would land. When we fill out the element with all of the text, it can have some kind of cross references, little notations or a sidebar or something like that, just in case someone might miss it. The current marine port element does have some policies around compatibility. So that's why you see that one not mentioned.
The naval base is not included in the marine port element. It's only the port.
And then UF 48. That just seems kind of odd to have that as a goal.
It's a policy.
Oh, it's a policy?
Yeah, the top 7 that are in bold are the goals. The best available science would be a
Oh,
policy.
those are the goals. Okay.
And then these are all the policies.
And so we would use the best available science to make a connection from the policies to the goals to implement the goal of protecting and restoring natural areas and wildlife habitats, supporting salmon recovery, protecting people and property, and providing opportunities for people to experience nature in the city.
Okay, sorry, I was misreading this. It's been a long day.
So, yep.
Question about UF 43, the plan large site redevelopment into blocks up to 300 by 600. Is that a standard? Is that what we currently have? Or is it both?
It's not, it is a standard in many jurisdictions. It is what we have in the northern part of the city. It is not what we have in the southern part of the city. If you remember back to when we first brought the urban form, I presented a map that I lovingly refer to as the blob map.
Yes.
That it had the North Everett with the grid, the hillside development, which is basically topographic, and then the big block suburban subdivision stuff. And so what we're trying to say is in areas where there are big blocks of land, we want them to provide grids and easier access for people to connect to a multitude of places instead of creating dead ends and lollipop loops.
There's not that many very large blocks of land in the city. One that comes to mind that is available for redevelopment right now is the Walmart site on Evergreen Way. This policy would need some supporting development regulations, and then if all of that happens before a redevelopment proposal comes in, then this would guide us towards breaking up that large site into a series of blocks with these dimensions.
Is the intention that every large block that's at least 3 by 600 would be impacted? Or like everything that's 10, 12 acres, if you happen to find 10 or 12 acres somewhere in the city that you could develop?
I think anywhere that you could fit multiple blocks of 300 by 600. So I don't know what that equates to in terms of size, but more than a couple acres, I would say.
Speaking of the Walmart site, when the Kmart site was redeveloped, had this been in place, would that have then looked more?
It would not be a
like-
dead-end subdivision.
Got it. All right, that makes sense.
And that's a really good example in context of why that matters.
So using that just conceptually, what would that mean then? There would be like a through street, or like internally there'd be blocks?
Right.
Yeah, I think I envision it as public right of way, but I think it could also be private streets or public access easements, or even just internal to it. But that there is a grid, and that gives a diversity of directions that you can go, and knits it into the fabric of the city and closes connections.
Would that necessarily mean that they wouldn't be able to get as much, I guess, density in there? Or is there generally a way to just kind of reorient and redesign to kind of get it all the same?
I think you could, yeah. I think you could. You need thoroughfares to get to buildings, and buildings aren't that massive, so it's more whether it's a system of dead ends versus through connections.
Additional questions, commissioners? I have like a general question. Do we know where our downtown space, where it compares or where it kind of ranks with regard to our recovery compared to peer cities?
In terms of
in
building space and development and.
Yeah, like yes, in terms of like vacant offices and storefronts and the number of workers that are in the area compared to, pre-COVID, where are we at in our recovery in relation to peer cities? Because I mean, this is, and I mentioned before that the concentration of the old school model of concentrating things in downtown, that was kind of shaken up a little bit by COVID, and that created other opportunity districts for smaller businesses. And so a lot of these goals seem to be focused on driving things back to a downtown core in the way that it was pre-COVID. And so I'm wondering if that is what we want to do. Is that the goal, to try to replicate what existed prior with the concentration on these things into the downtown core?
I think we'll talk centers next. There's the downtown of downtown Everett and Metro Everett, and then there's the centers, which is bringing smaller versions of that concept to neighborhoods around the city. I think there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained by both concentration and centralization. Transportation is one of the most obvious, but then there are others in terms of infrastructure and utilities, and then there's the fact that you can have the restaurants and the synergy between shopping and dining and entertainment, and all of those things depend on concentration, and it takes a little bit of support and help sometimes to nurture those concentrations, but then once they're there, I think people love them, businesses benefit from them, city government runs more efficiently from them. So my opinion is yes, that is a worthy policy goal, and things are different after the pandemic, and I think we've seen a lot of good things come to local and smaller centers, especially with different commuting patterns and everything. So I think there's an ability to nurture all of those.
Yeah, and some of it's driven organically by the way people respond to things. And I guess that's kind of the piece I'm asking about is it developing organically in a way that supports continuing to drive policies and goals in that same direction? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just wondering if we have clarity around that.
I don't
Or
know
if there's even a
either.
way to get it. This is new. So that's why I'm asking about where we are in relation to peer cities.
Yeah, I can check in with Downtown Everett Association, may have figures going back on occupancy and sales and things like that. Our economic development team may have some as well. So I'll check in. All I know is what I observe, which is definitely a recovering and increasingly healthy downtown. I've seen enormous progress actually in the last couple of years.
In response to that, though, this concept here of the centers, though, is kind of maybe a deviation from that idea of the concentration. It is kind of to me it's kind of a hybrid that you drive people to the center, but you have multiple kind of centers, so it's maybe less intensification, but still that idea of, core areas. Maybe it's maybe a different concept from like maybe what you're mentioning right there. So maybe this is kind of that response to that maybe.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that does kind of blend those two ideas. I was just thinking in terms of more information. More information, just supporting those ideas in general. More information is better.
Speaking of, well, you said you want to talk about centers, because I
That's our
guess that
next
could wait.
agenda item, so let's keep going with this, but
I have a question about centers, so I'm like, perfect
I
segue
will not stand
right
in the
this
way.
moment.
Well, let's ask commissioners, do you have additional questions on the urban form element, or do we feel ready to move on to the next agenda item?
And
I
I'll
feel
say about half of this is about centers anyways, so if we happen to flow back and forth, that's okay with us.
I feel good enough to move on.
Okay. Commissioner Ballard? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is centers.
Do you want to ask your question? No, I can leave. No, go for it. I don't want you to lose it.
I won't. I more was just gonna ask, because Church Rider just asked, about our neighbor cities, how they're doing, how we're doing, which I love comparing against other towns. And I was then wondering, is this concept of, I call it big downtown, medium downtown, tiny downtown, a widely used theory or process? Because it seems like a great idea and also slightly like just illogical naturally because people congregate in areas. But you've named them, which made me think, is this something that other cities have done, or are you guys just like super clever and smart and came up with a really good idea for our lovely town?
I would love to say I'm super clever and smart, but that is not the case. Centers have been originating, centers existed
Right.
all over the place. Before, as I said before, when we talked about it, in 1926, I think, is when Euclid versus Ambler was the primary zoning code case that went to the Supreme Court. And in that Supreme Court case, gave cities the opportunity to start dividing cities up into uses. Prior to that, cities in different neighborhoods, and I'm from New York, so I will use the different neighborhoods. You have Greenwich Village, you have Harlem, you have the Bronx, you have Brooklyn. All of those have a whole host of different centers in those neighborhoods depending on where you are. They had grocery stores, they had tailors, they had different uses in close proximity. And that served the need of that community. Once we went to what is known as Euclidean zoning, we spread it all out. And we created the option for people to live farther away from places that they need to be. So then we needed more roads, we needed more ways of getting around. We created arterials and all kinds of other things instead of walking to places that were close by. So in late 90s, early 2000s, what was called new urbanism at that point in time started saying, wait a minute, this isn't working. We're plowing under fields, we're doing all these things that are making us not healthy, heavier, and just not good ways of using our land efficiently. So they started saying, well, wait a minute, we probably need to go back to that efficient form of building communities around a multitude of uses in a smaller place. So to say that this is new is not new, it's just coming full circle again. But what it is doing is saying in certain places in cities, and we have them in Everett here. I mean, we have grocery stores in different locations and shops around grocery stores that are adjacent to residential neighborhoods, but they're spread out. Mm-hmm. But then we have this whole car culture in between. Mm-hmm. So the question is that what we want to continue to have, or is it something a little bit more concentrated so that you have the opportunity to walk to a grocery store or a corner store for your kids to go get the milk that needs to be gotten because you forgot to pick it up at whatever time, and they can go get their candy bar or something for their special treat or ice cream close to home, and they don't necessarily need to be walked there because they're not crossing a main street. So we talked about putting small-scale commercial into neighborhoods. Well, this is like the next step up. And so what we were trying to do in this conversation was, and it's been something that Puget Sound Regional Council adopted in their 2050 thing, was this centers that served a variety of needs across the region and in cities. So the University District is a prime example of a center. It serves the needs of the people living around the university. It's got grocery stores, it's got housing, it's got businesses, it's got a variety of things. It's got bars. I mean, it's got what students want. And even further down the hill, University Village, which was a shopping center, it has now grown around it to add a whole lot of housing around it in what was underutilized, even big box stores. So what we're saying here is, let's look at the places where we already know that we have people going to grocery stores or going to restaurants or congregating and gathering places. And if you remember back to our dot map with all the circles and dots and everything, what we did was take that information and bring it to you to say, okay, where are the places that best we can build on what we already have, but also adding certain requirements that make the minimum height now higher. The streets, by creating grids in some of those big block lots, more walkable, creating public spaces within that zone. What is it that we can do? And so by designating these places as centers, we can then prioritize resources of the city, be it time, in-kind services, zoning code requirements, or other things to say this is where we want to develop it. So we've created a set of policies that you just went through, and we've looked at what would be like the minimum height requirements in those areas, where setbacks would be. Instead of a minimum setback, it'd be a maximum setback. Also, where would parking go? It would not go between the street and the building. It would go around to the side or the back in some form or fashion. And the uses would not be automotive in nature. So, and the centers must connect to each other as well as to the adjacent neighborhoods. So that's what we're trying to achieve through our policies and through our codes. We have then given you the map in the packet that shows where those locations are and what we are calling them. So downtown is already a regional center, is recognized by Puget Sound Regional Council and by Snohomish County. What we're then calling our sort of next layer down of centers, community hubs, so that they have bigger institutions or bus rapid transit sites or light rail stations, so that there's going to be a congregation of people getting on and off transit there. The next level down is the neighborhood node, which would provide those small scale neighborhood services. And yes, we have some of those on Evergreen Way, and that was just because if we name all of the different intersections of Evergreen Way a community hub, it would be sort of diluting what we could possibly get out of the ones that have more opportunity for growth and development because of what is being proposed there. So on the map that you have in front of you that was part of the packet, the circle at the west end of Mukilteo Boulevard, that is not a neighborhood node. That should have been taken off. But the
Allison, just to clarify, so you're talking
That
about
one,
this one
yeah.
right here? Yeah, because it's not on this one, so
Right.
this is the correct one?
That is the correct one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So that's what we're looking at. And I'm happy to answer questions, but what I would like ultimately is a confirmation that, yes, this is where we would like to head and that these locations make sense.
On the neighborhood node level, the tiny downtowns. Are they just kind of, like, I'm the Silver Lake representative, so I care so much. Is it kind of like a general idea, it's generally in this area, or is it like specific, like we picked this intersection for a reason?
We've been waiting for you, Commissioner Sullivan, because we had this conversation about that neighborhood node right over there on Silver Lake.
Yeah, 'cause I'm trying
And
to
we
figure out
were
what it's on top of.
discussing whether or not it should be a little bit closer to 112, or if it should be further north, the way it's
Costco.
depicted. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's kind of what we should really have a rectangle. Circle is not good for our neighborhood.
I would
I
totally
need
agree
this.
with you, and we
I need
have,
from 112th to 100th.
we have started in-house looking at what the potential boundaries would be, but we have not we have, I think, 4 sets of maps. So
Well-
depending on which of the staff member you ask.
Yeah, and that's
where
fair,
it is.
'cause-
And so and then there's also a sort of feeling is, do we want to define this in such a manner that if somebody was across the street or adjacent, do we want to say, oh, sorry, you're not in the community hub or the neighborhood node, but your idea is really good, and therefore, no, we're not going there. So it's whether we go with sort of a fuzzy line or a hard line is really in the conversation. Maybe our attorney can give us ideas.
I was just trying to understand, now that I look at it, this, where the circle is right here, what actually is there? Is that the Costco?
That's what I was trying to
Or is
figure out.
that
It's hard for me to
the
tell. but-
Safeway store down there?
It's different.
No,
On
it's,
this one, this is that center where, off of 112th, across from the Safeway.
Right, they
But-
just,
But then
Oh,
on this
okay.
one, it looks a little
There's
bit
a hardware
further
store and a
north.
gym.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this one looks further south than that, but
That's-
maybe I'm,
I wouldn't worry about the location.
okay, right,
It's-
right.
It's
Yeah, that's an
literally,
interesting area, because I don't know, it's hard to say in my mind. The area definitely seems appropriate to me, but how you which of those kind of blocks you actually like centered around
Yeah.
is maybe interesting.
And the
well,
only
Costco has a new mixed-use facility in LA now. They have
That's-
broken ground
makes
for,
sense, actually. That tracks. Um,
So they have to get their permit through.
right.
Although, for example, if you were to center it around a Costco, I
I
mean,
mean,
that doesn't give you a whole lot of
worst
opportunity
idea.
for mix things. It's a large space, it's probably not gonna,
I don't know, Costco's a restaurant.
But they're not gonna, like-
shopping, residential above.
you can get your tires
yeah,
changed.
I don't know, it's an interesting area. It's a good, I think those are very excellent questions.
The only other thing about the fuzzy line thing, because I agree, is when you're looking at these, if you haven't already, Everett is divided into official neighborhoods. That might want to be considered or taken into consideration into how you do that. They're not always going to line up perfectly, but if they do, great.
It doesn't, these are not on neighborhood basis, because if you look at where the neighborhoods are, they're far bigger than what would be the center area.
The neighborhood boundaries, you
Yes.
mean? Yeah, like the Silver Lake neighborhood boundary is much larger than.
Right, it would
it looks
include
like.
all of the stuff that, spiders out into the county and.
Yeah, we are non-county as well.
It would seem to me too that if the more successful this might be as you're driving maybe activity into these maybe neighborhood nodes, there would, I guess, success would look like there being pressure probably to, now once it gets densified, to kind of spread it out, which I guess, I don't know, some people might think that's a bad thing, but maybe it could be the good thing, because you're still concentrating and that's what you're wanting. So maybe maybe remains to be seen, that idea, the fuzzy line. Do you want it to be restrictive and only contained so that it doesn't spread to maybe, alter some of the, I guess, at least in that area, maybe residential area. But on the other hand, maybe if people wanted to convert some of that into some more multifamily and go up a little bit,
Or
maybe
mixed use.
maybe that wouldn't be the end of the world. And so, like, maybe success is, yeah, or
All of it.
right, yeah,
It's amorphous at the moment.
right.
It's fuzzy.
Allison, you touched on a couple of the things of what it means to be a center. Do you want to maybe spend a moment going through those? Because I think it helps the decision really of what the boundaries should be, but also maybe what should and shouldn't be a center. And both are subject to change, what it means to be a center and where the centers are, and maybe they inform each other.
So part of being a center is creating a space for a mixture of land uses so that activities can occur and the synergy can be built there. So those are what the policies look like. On the code end of things right now, we are looking at minimum heights. So in a community hub, the minimum height would be 4 stories, so that you could either have 4 stories of residential or a mixed-use building. And that doesn't mean that that's the maximum, because most of these are in zones that are MU7s and MU15, so that there is the opportunity to go higher. We're just saying you can't build a single-story grocery store in those centers. It has to be a combination facility.
And just for context, right now, we have the 2-story minimum height in the MU zone. The MU zone is in a lot of what would be the centers. If you remember our current map, it skips between business, the B zone that's red, and the MU zone that's pink. So the pink has a minimum height, the red does not. And then we also have on TOD streets 4-floor minimum height. That's Metro Everett around the Everett Station and Pacific in general.
So for the neighborhood nodes, it would be a minimum height of 2 stories. Again, they could go higher. If there is single-family residential or neighborhood residential that is within the boundary, that height would stay at the height of the neighborhood residential. So it's forcing the heights more towards the center of that hub. So that if you look at some of the areas around Providence Hospital where we have the Donovan District, it would still stay at what's allowed under the neighborhood residential without putting additional pressure for those areas to change. It would also protect some of the neighborhood character. Setbacks for those new buildings would be minimal, like a maximum of maybe 5 feet. And again, parking towards the rear. And again, connecting those areas through footpaths or street grids to the adjacent neighborhoods to allow for connecting so that people are easy to walk and take advantage of the space and the activity in those areas. The community hubs would be, as I said, adjacent to BRT or light rail. And the neighborhood nodes are more where we have crossroads within existing neighborhoods. And that is primarily for neighborhood nodes, it's off of Evergreen. So that would be, I can't remember what we named the thing, the Valley View, no, it's not Valley View. View Ridge Center and Silver Lake is probably the two that are more at crossroads of places.
And then we covered this 2 weeks ago with the zoning table, the use matrix, and there were a number of uses that would be prohibited in the center. The auto-oriented uses, fuel sales, vehicle sales, rental, service repair, large animal vet clinic, commercial kennels, park and ride, nursery, drive-through. Those would also potentially apply to centers. We have street designations that enter into this mix, so the map that you have that has all the red kind of areas and then the circles, those red areas highlight the TOD and the pedestrian street designations. Those street designations currently function sort of like we might use the center designations. They restrict certain uses, auto fuel sales, auto service, commercial storage, storage yard, solid waste transfer station. Some uses are prohibited on the ground floor, a lot of the same ones that we actually borrowed from that list. If it's not allowed on a pedestrian street, it makes sense that it wouldn't be allowed in a center, which is kind of like a collection
Although
of-
it does say residential, and I would say that that is not going to be accurate, probably.
Right. The footnote 1, I think it was, restricting residential on TOD streets is, maybe there's something we should do around encouraging a mix of uses, but we're pretty reluctant to limit residential.
I mean, what we're seeing in some of those TOD type of places in other jurisdictions are townhouses on the lower level and then flats up above. So
Because when you say limiting residential, we're talking like multifamily though. We wouldn't want to limit multifamily, but maybe limit.
Well,
that's
we're
what it
currently on
does.
the ground floor.
it does right
Currently
now.
on the ground floor on a TOD street, so Pacific for one, no
Right,
more
right.
than 25% of your facade may be residential, but it's okay if it's a garage.
Okay. Can I ask about the community hub down at Airport Road? I'm just looking at the circle that's drawn there. It looks to me like more than, well, the majority of that circle actually is outside the city limits.
It is. The
Is that-
county is designating the other 3/4 of it.
Okay.
Yeah, they have, what are they calling, urban transit zone or something? It's a weird name, but they're in the process of doing that.
Part of the centers thing came up from the countywide planning policies call for countywide centers, and then those countywide centers are like mini versions of the regional growth center, and they connect to priority transportation funding. You get a couple points on a grant application through the PSRC managed federal transportation funds. The Snohomish County, other counties have had these countywide centers, Snohomish County hasn't yet, so all of the cities that could have a center are working on that along with us. Snohomish County has indicated that they intend to designate their Pac-Man part of the Airport Road area as a countywide center, so we're matching that or proposing to match that on our side. And then they were gonna, I think, seek designation of the light rail stations as regional growth centers, and I think there were some other countywide centers as well, so,
And that is a light rail site.
yeah, yep.
Well, I was gonna say, I think it all looks great, and I think it's a great concept, and be really cool till 100 years from now when they go back to the Euclidean. Why did we ever go away from the Euclidean design? So speaking to our counterparts 100 years from now, I guess we're sorry, but we're riding the wave.
I did have one question that it's been a while since I've asked it. For the areas that border the county, but that are still neighborhoods, Silver Lake, but not just Silver Lake. 19th is going to be designated as mixed-use high-rise. Okay, but directly east of that are single-family homes. That's a pretty big jump in size, but that's county land. Have we thought about how that's going to work? I mean, is it just going to be that there's going to be a 15-story building and a single-family home right behind it, and that's just how it is, or is there going to be some work with them on how to plan for this? Or even if you go a little bit further southeast of the lake itself into the UR4, it's the same situation. You have 4-story buildings in a current single-family home residential neighborhood, and then on the other side of the street, it's going to remain single family, while you have built 4
I think
stories.
that there are going to be some issues along the east side of 19th because you don't have the lot depth.
Right.
So in order to get a buildable site for a 15-story building is going to be a challenge.
So some of that naturally shakes out.
Yes.
But not all of it.
No, there may be
Right.
some backing up to it. Right now, there is a 35-foot setback. Whether that's going to stay is to be determined, which would make that lot even less buildable.
Yeah, but that's 35 feet.
So currently in 1922, is the Heights chapter. There's a section on height reductions, 1922-030, and there's a list of zones of where a development site might be. There's a list of zones where a development site might be, and then a list of adjacent zones, and we currently would
In the north
require
end, right?
from the MU zone to a single-family zone for 50 feet into the MU zone, you drop down to the height of the single-family zone of 28 feet. Some of the answer to the question depends on what we do with that kind of compatibility and step-down table. I think we're envisioning backing off on some of those, and we do apply that even if the single-family zone is on the county side.
And the county is not changing the zoning in that area.
That was what I was just to say, is why are we going down? Why aren't they coming up?
Right, both would be an option.
Well, it could be annexed too.
Right, that's the even trickier part of that particular area of the south end of Everett is, it's all in the urban growth boundary.
Right.
That's how long are we even gonna have this fight?
Right. I think Alisanne's absolutely right, though, with the shape of the parcels on most of that part where it's really abutting, it would be difficult to get anything substantial. It will still be taller than the house
Sure.
across the street.
Which, right now, the tallest are 3-story townhouses along there, so it's not, that
Yeah.
crazy.
I think by the time it actually starts redeveloping on the east side of 19th, there will be changes to what's happening on the county side too. And the lots will be being purchased and redeveloped. And that also depends on how the BRT shapes out over there too.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few vacant lots on the east side of the lake, on the east side of 19th, that are just sitting idle. And
I mean, I think that they won't go 15, but I think they might go 7-ish.
yeah, that's kind of what I think too. All right, cool. That's all I had.
Commissioners, additional questions about centers?
I guess as our Silver Lake whisperer, we had 2 different circles. Thoughts on where the center feels most right? Okay, and it
No.
can be,
I mean-
this is future development, so it's not, sometimes it's starting from a spark that's already there.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
I mean, you do have Fred Meyer, which is technically in the neighborhood, but it backs right up into Providence, and so you kind of hit, I don't know. And then even more residential areas. So the northern part of the lake, where there is more business, feels like one large section in my mind.
I think our maps were all north of the lake.
Yeah, then, I mean,
Like 1/12 centered around that,
is it 1/12 or is it 100th? I'm not sure it's gonna have a big,
I can send you pictures of
mean?
our maps, and you can add
the top
your-
secret maps?
Of the top secret maps, and you can add your 2 cents to the other 4 that
All
are
right, all
already
over
out
them.
there.
But yeah, no, I think it'll shake out on its own, really.
Yeah, I agree.
Put it in the middle.
I agree. I do think that there is going to be some of it that is shaking out on its own, and it just sort of sees how things happen.
Yeah, I think there's more land availability a little bit north of 112, if I'm thinking about it correctly.
that midsection between Costco and,
And Safeway, essentially, there's like smaller buildings on large
Yeah.
lots.
yeah. Additional comments, questions, commissioners? Okay, we have a final opportunity for public comment. Ayana, do we have anyone online who wishes to provide public comment?
No comments.
Okay, with that, we've completed our agenda and we are adjourned.